In the winter of 1848, on a quiet river in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, a man named James Marshall bent down, picked up a small yellow pebble, and the world changed. It wasn't a discovery. It was a detonation. Because gold isn't metal. Gold is emotion, desire, fear, greed, hope, compressed into something you can hold in your hand. And when people heard that gold was lying in California's dirt, waiting to be claimed by anyone fast enough to reach it, a global fuse ignited. Newspapers carried the news like a virus. Ships abandoned their cargo to race west. Entire crews deserted mid-voyage. Cooks left restaurants. Teachers left classrooms. Farmers left their fields half-plowed. Within months, the quiet frontier of California became the gravitational center of the planet, a place where fortunes could be made in minutes and lost even faster. The world had seen conquest. It had seen empire. It had seen war. But it had never seen mania. Tens of thousands poured in from the American East. Tens of thousands more from Chile, Peru, Mexico, then Australia, then China, then Europe. Ships packed with men chasing a rumor more powerful than any government decree. They left behind families, cities, entire lives, chasing a dream measured in ounces. Gold didn't unite the world. It scrambled it. Harbors choked with abandoned ships. Roads turned into stampedes. Mining camps erupted overnight. Lawless, chaotic, desperate. Prices soared. Guns multiplied. Cities exploded from nothing. And the global economy itself began to tilt. Because when gold is discovered, it doesn't just enrich miners. It reshapes nations. Banks suddenly had more reserves. Governments had more leverage. Businesses had more credit. Currencies strengthened. Trade accelerated. Migration spiked. California became a vortex, pulling in labor, money, ambition, violence, and dreams from every direction. And the rest of the world watched, stunned, terrified, mesmerized. Because if one gold strike could transform a frontier into a global capital in months, everyone wondered the same thing. Where's the next one? And within a few years it came, not in America, but on the other side of the world. Australia. Another discovery, another explosion, another economy jolted into the modern age. The gold rush wasn't a moment. It was the start of a century-long chain reaction that would reshape global wealth forever. When gold was discovered in California, the United States didn't just expand westward, it detonated westward. In 1848, California was little more than a remote, sparsely populated territory with no railroads, no major cities, and barely a functioning government. Within months, it became the most desired patch of land on the planet. The numbers tell the story. In 1848, fewer than 1,000 non-native settlers lived in California. By 1850, there were 100,000. By 1855, more than 300,000. No other migration in American history happened this fast. No other migration was this chaotic. And no other migration rewired the nation's economy so violently. California became a magnet. The rest of the world became its copper wire. Farmers became miners. Lawyers became gamblers. Sailors became deserters. Merchants became millionaires. Or corpses. Every ship that arrived brought people hungry for one thing: freedom from their old lives. The gold rush wasn't just an economic event. It was a psychological revolution. For the first time, ordinary people believed they could rewrite their destiny in an instant. America's promise of opportunity transformed from a slogan into a fever. And that fever did something extraordinary. It accelerated the industrialization of the United States. Gold flooded eastern banks with new reserves. Credit expanded. Railroads got funded. Factories got built. Cities grew. Investment surged. The dollar strengthened. California's gold didn't stay in California. It moved east, then across the Atlantic, then into the veins of the global economy. Suddenly, the world had more money. Liquid, portable, universally trusted. It was the first time a single resource discovery reshaped international finance. But gold also created something darker. Mining camps became violent microeconomies fueled by alcohol, crime, and desperation. Prices skyrocketed. An apple could cost a day's wages, a pair of boots a week's. Wealth concentrated fast, disappeared faster, and triggered the first major American boom and bust cycles in the West. San Francisco went from sand dunes to skyscrapers almost overnight, a city built on adrenaline, optimism, and risk. America learned a new economic rhythm: rush, boom, crash, rebuild, repeat. And the rest of the world was watching. If California could explode into wealth in a year, what was stopping another frontier from doing the same? That question didn't take long to answer, because in just a few years, halfway around the world, another gold strike would erupt, one big enough to save an empire on the brink of collapse, Australia, and its impact would be even larger. By the early 1850s, the British Empire had a problem it didn't want to admit. Industrial growth was slowing, unemployment was rising, social tensions simmered through its cities, and London's financial system, stretched thin by wars, debt, and global commitments, needed a shock of new wealth. That shock came from the last place anyone expected: Australia. A remote colony thousands of miles from London, barely populated, barely developed, and mostly ignored by the world, until one miner cracked open a rock near Bathurst in 1851 and found gold gleaming inside it. Not flakes, not dust, chunks. And suddenly, Australia, a land Britain once used as a prison, became the richest mining frontier on Earth. The discovery detonated across the empire. Ships flooded into Melbourne and Sydney. British newspapers printed stories that sounded too wild to believe. Workers abandoned factories. Farmers left their fields. London's docks emptied as men boarded ships heading for the other side of the world. In a single year, Australia's population doubled. In a single decade, it tripled. What California had triggered in America, Australia now triggered for Britain: a national redraw, an economic reboot, a psychological eruption. Gold poured into the empire's veins. British banks swelled with new reserves. The pound strengthened. Factories expanded. Railroads multiplied. Investors regained confidence. Exports soared. Australia didn't just enrich miners, it stabilized a global superpower. London's financial system, trembling under the pressure of industrial expansion, was suddenly flooded with liquidity. Gold from Victoria and New South Wales became the backbone of the global gold standard. It strengthened Britain's credit abroad. It financed imperial expansion. It underwrote the building of railways, telegraphs, ports, and trade networks that stretched across continents. The British Empire didn't just survive the mid-century economic crisis. It emerged stronger because Australia had become its silent engine. But gold didn't just pour into banks. It poured into cities. Melbourne, once a muddy outpost, exploded into a global metropolis, rivaling San Francisco in speed and ambition. Wealth reshaped Australian society, creating new classes, new markets, and new conflicts. And with prosperity came migration from everywhere: China, Europe, America, turning Australia into a multicultural frontier decades before the world had a name for the concept. Gold rewrote identities, geographies, economies. But the century's biggest gold discovery wasn't in California. It wasn't in Australia. It was still waiting, in a ridge of mountains at the bottom of Africa, a discovery so massive it would rewrite global finance permanently. South Africa. And the world was about to learn what happens when gold becomes the foundation not just of wealth, but of power. By the late 1800s, the world had already been shaken by California and transformed by Australia. But nothing, not even those explosions, prepared humanity for what was buried under a ridge of hills in South Africa. In 1886, prospectors on the Witwatersrand struck gold, not nuggets, not veins, but the largest gold deposit ever discovered on Earth. This wasn't a gold field. It was an empire waiting to be mined. And for the next century, South Africa would become the beating heart of global finance, the place where more than half of the world's gold supply would be pulled from the ground, melted, minted, and shipped into the vaults of London, New York, Berlin, and beyond. The discovery didn't just spark a rush, it ignited a geopolitical earthquake. Within months, thousands swarmed into the region: British miners, Dutch settlers, African laborers, American engineers. fortune hunters from every corner of the world. Johannesburg, a place that barely existed on any map, exploded into a metropolis of dust, ambition, and violence. But unlike California's placer gold or Australia's surface deposits, the Witwatersrand gold lay deep underground, miles beneath hard rock. Extracting it required capital, machinery, engineering, explosives, and a labor force on a scale the world had never seen. And so South Africa pioneered something new: industrial mining. Enormous companies rose overnight, backed by British banks and European financiers. Mining became mechanized, militarized, corporatized. This wasn't panning by rivers. This was drilling, blasting, tunneling, and organizing entire economies around one resource. The mines generated unimaginable wealth and unimaginable inequality. Gold enriched London. Gold enriched investors. Gold enriched mining magnates, men who became some of the richest on earth. But the labor force? Tens of thousands of African workers lived in brutal conditions, paid pennies to dig out metal that made empires rich. South Africa's gold fueled European banks, strengthened the British pound, and stabilized the global gold standard. It financed wars, underwrote railroads, and powered the world's expanding industrial economy. But it also lit the fuse of conflict. The British wanted the gold. The Boer republics controlled the land. War was inevitable. The Second Boer War erupted, a brutal conflict fought not for ideology, not for land, but for the right to control the greatest source of wealth on the planet. When the British finally seized control, they didn't just win a war. They won the world's financial engine. Yet the gold that built South Africa also fractured it. Deep inequality hardened into law. Economic divides became racial divides. And decades later, the system of apartheid emerged. A political structure built in the shadow of mines that had made nations rich and workers poor. The Witwatersrand didn't just reshape South Africa. It reshaped global wealth and exposed the dark truth behind every gold rush. When wealth concentrates too fast, power concentrates with it. And where power concentrates, conflict follows. But gold wasn't done changing the world, because in the decades that followed, the massive influx of global gold would fuel something even bigger: the rise of modern money itself. By the mid-1800s, something subtle but seismic was happening beneath the global economy. California had poured gold into America. Australia had poured gold into Britain. South Africa was about to pour more gold into the world than any mine in history. And all that gold didn't stay in mining towns. It flowed into banks. And banks did something revolutionary with it. They multiplied it. Because gold wasn't just wealth, it was trust. A metal that governments couldn't print, politicians couldn't conjure, and empires couldn't fake. Gold became the anchor for modern currencies, the foundation for loans, the justification for expanding industries, railroads, factories, and entire cities. The gold rushes didn't simply enrich individuals, they rewired the global financial system. Before the 1800s, money moved slowly. Banks were small. Credit was limited. Investment was cautious. Risk was local. But when gold flooded the world, everything accelerated. Gold filled vaults. Vaults strengthened banks. Banks expanded lending. Lending built industries. Industries built nations. This was the gold standard, a financial revolution that said, your money is worth something because it can be exchanged for gold. Suddenly, countries that controlled gold didn't just control wealth, they controlled global credibility. London became the financial capital of the world because British banks sat on Australian and South African gold. The British pound became the world's reserve currency, not by accident, but by geology. Meanwhile, American banks grew stronger as California gold flowed east. Railroads multiplied, factories expanded, cities exploded. Trade networks fused the country together in ways never before possible. Gold allowed governments to borrow at massive scale, and investors trusted them because the metal backing their debts was real. It was the first time in history that natural resources ignited a worldwide credit explosion. But gold didn't just expand economies, it transformed societies. People followed the metal. Families migrated across continents. Immigrants chased opportunity from San Francisco to Melbourne to Johannesburg. Global labor mobility skyrocketed. Cultures collided. Cities became multicultural engines of capitalism, decades before globalization had a name. Wealth, for the first time, flowed internationally rather than locally. But with this new global wealth came a new global vulnerability. Because when the world backed its money with gold, entire economies rose and fell with mining output. A bad year for gold could mean a bad year for finance. A political conflict near a gold mine could send shockwaves across continents. Humanity had tethered its future to a metal buried in unpredictable ground. And yet, that decision powered the Industrial Revolution, built modern banking, and created the financial architecture the world still relies on. The gold rushes didn't just define the 1800s. They built the monetary universe we still live in today. But their legacy didn't end with the gold standard. The final impact was far stranger, because the rushes of the 1800s still shape inequality, wealth distribution, and global power in the 21st century. And that story belongs to the last chapter. The gold rushes of the 1800s didn't end when the mines thinned out. They didn't end when the last prospector packed up his tools. They didn't end when the gold standard collapsed in the 20th century. Their fingerprints are still everywhere, in the financial system, in global migration, in inequality, in geopolitics, and in the way nations think about wealth. Because gold didn't just change the past, it shaped the present. The first legacy is population. California, Australia, and South Africa weren't meant to become global powerhouses. Yet one resource turned them into engines of growth. Cities like San Francisco, Melbourne, and Johannesburg grew not gradually, but explosively, built on waves of migration that still define their cultures today. The second legacy is inequality. Gold made a few men unimaginably rich, mine owners, bankers, investors, while the workers who dug it out of the rock remained poor. That divide hardened into long-term economic structures. In South Africa, it contributed to the creation of apartheid. In America, it fueled corporate monopolies and industrial titans. In Australia, it created new elites overnight. Even today, those wealth patterns persist. Descendants of mining fortunes still sit atop economic hierarchies, while former mining regions still wrestle with poverty once the gold is gone. The third legacy is finance. The gold rushes forced the world to build modern banking. They created centralized bank reserves, global credit networks, cross-border investment flows, trust in national currencies, the world's first truly international financial cycles. Every boom and bust market today, stocks, crypto, real estate, follows psychological patterns born in the 1800s mining camps: euphoria, overinvestment, collapse, and recovery. The fourth legacy is corporate mining. The industrial techniques pioneered in South Africa, deep mining, explosives, corporate ownership, migrant labor, became the blueprint for modern resource extraction. Today's oil giants, copper companies, diamond cartels, and rare earth miners all descend from the same model: capital-intensive, globally connected, politically powerful. The fifth legacy is geopolitical leverage. Britain used Australian gold to stabilize its empire. America used California gold to fuel industrialization. Global powers used South African gold to anchor the gold standard. Today, nations still fight over minerals the same way empires fought over gold, except now the prize is lithium, cobalt, and rare metals powering modern technology. The gold rushes created a world where resources, power, but the deepest legacy is psychological. The idea that one discovery, one strike, one field, one frontier can transform a life, a city, or an entire nation overnight. That belief still fuels modern speculation. Silicon Valley was built on the same mindset as a mining camp. Crypto runs on the same adrenaline as a gold vein. Real estate booms follow the same emotional script. Gold taught humanity to chase opportunity at scale, and we never stopped. The gold rushes didn't just reshape the 1800s, they built the modern global economy and the modern global imagination.